a shame that that this bill has been introduced at this particular time. It's minor tinkerings and we're supporting it, but we should have been doing a lot more than what this bill entails.
Kevin Hague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party supported this bill in its first reading and will continue to support it at this second reading, sir. Biosecurity seems to me to have 4 different phases. One is prevention of biosecurity risks occurring in the first place. A second is detection of those risks, typically at or around the border. The third is stamping out incursions where they have got through our detection process. And the fourth is mitigation, where the incursion cannot be stamped out and we are instead looking to ameliorate the worst effects. And it's obvious, sir, that just as in my field, health, where we look at a disease progression in that same way and look at exactly those same phases of trying to intervene in a person's disease progression, our emphasis must be on the first end of that, on the prevention end. So we do everything that we can to prevent the biosecurity risk in the first place. If that fails, we then throw as much resource as we possibly can into the detection process. And so what this bill deals with is largely the detection process. But also the government believes that the increased fines that the bill provides for are an important element in its prevention process. And it's really those first 2 phases of the biosecurity process that I want to focus on tonight. So in relation to prevention of biosecurity risks, I want to begin by giving some praise to MAF Biosecurity, because I had the privilege of being able to join the Select Committee, and I thank Shane Ardern and the members of the committee for the opportunity to do that during the consideration of this bill. And during that time, we heard from MAF Biosecurity around the processes that they use to educate travellers about biosecurity risks. And I was impressed by the lengths to which MAF Biosecurity is going in that regard. But sir, travellers coming in to the country is just one aspect of the biosecurity risk that we face. And there is a very much larger risk that we face around goods and freight coming into the country through shipping containers, shipping holds. It's very much more difficult to prevent biosecurity risks in that regard, because many of the operators have commercial incentives, in fact, to skimp on the processes that might be used to reduce or eliminate biosecurity risks to this country. And indeed, sir, what I wanted to point out was the unnecessary risk that we are often posing to ourselves by our needless importation of goods to this country. I've spoken in the House several times about our importation of palm kernel. So that's a classic example of a product that we have absolutely no need to import into New Zealand. And the biosecurity risks that we import with that product are very substantial indeed. I've spoken, and Sir Damien O'Connor has spoken in the House about the risks around the insect infestations of the palm kernel shipments that arrive here. I've also spoken about the risk of foot and mouth disease in this palm kernel. We're importing this stuff from a region of the world where foot and mouth disease is endemic. The stuff is coming into the country and being fed out, and farmers are reporting soil contamination. That soil contamination can only occur after the point in the process where the palm kernel has been exposed to heat. So in other words, the contamination is occurring after the only process that might have done something about foot and mouth disease. And so we know that foot and mouth disease is viable in soil and in water for extended periods of time. This is a massive risk that we are taking, and we're taking it entirely needlessly. This is the kind of madness that can result, in particular, from free trade agreements. And I raise the topic because it's timely. We've just signed another free trade agreement with Malaysia, incidentally, the country in which foot and mouth disease is endemic. And what free trade agreements encourage is the import of goods to contribute to a consumption-led economy, the very kind of economy we don't need, kneecapping local industries, in this case, in the case of palm kernel, the grain farmers of New Zealand, who are suffering very badly as a result of this trade, and taking entirely unnecessary biosecurity risks. So in that prevention phase, there's a whole bunch of risks that we're taking and we don't need to. In relation to detection, sir, these increased fines are effectively a trade-off that the Minister proposes. It proposes as a disincentive for travellers to bring in with them biosecurity risks on the basis that travellers will pay closer attention to their luggage and weed out those risks. And we're making this trade-off because the Prime Minister wants the travelling time from Australia to New Zealand to be 8 minutes shorter. So that's the goal here, a saving of 8 minutes on a trip of multiple hours. For that, we are sacrificing our approach of universal screening to one that's based on risk profiling. And so I want to raise in the House some figures that the Select Committee heard from MAF Biosecurity about that issue. And I hesitate before doing so to point out that the Select Committee itself, as Shane Ardoon has noted, and I thank him for that, has indicated to this House that it is not convinced by the risk profiling approach. More work needs to be done on that. And the Select Committee, sir, is absolutely right. Because what MAF Biosecurity found in its trial of the risk profiling approach was that those passengers who were deemed to be low risk and went through the low risk trial lane nonetheless yielded some 51 items of biosecurity risk. So out of the 1,186 seizures of biosecurity risks, certainly most of them were from passengers deemed high risk, but 51 came from passengers deemed low risk. If we only screen those passengers who are deemed to be low risk, those 51 risk items would enter New Zealand. And so, of those 51 items, I won't run through the whole analysis, but some 17 of them, for example, were fruit fly host material. Well, sir, I've spoken in the House before and in my first reading speech about the catastrophic impact of a fruit fly infestation just in the Bay of Plenty, just in the the first year. Another 18 of those 51 risks were around footwear, in other words, footwear that hadn't been properly cleaned. And what's the risk around improperly cleaned footwear? Well, it's the importation of soil. Soil, again, that can contain pathogens. And so I've spoken about the risk of foot and mouth disease from soil, but also in the news in this last week or so, I've been talking about the risk to our iconic coyote species. Again, another soil-based pathogen. These are risks that the government proposes to take in return for that 8 minutes. And so I've spoken in the public domain in the last week about the government being asleep at the wheel on biosecurity. The Minister has accused me of being alarmist. Well, I say I am alarmed. I am alarmed by the risk, and so should this House be and all New Zealanders be. This is a massive risk. We don't need to take it. The Green Party will support the bill.